This is the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. I am your host, Angelica Slitska, and today's guest is Wendy Kettleborough, who is a brain architect, conceptual engineer, author, trainer, consultant, and creator. So thank you, Wendy, very much for being on this podcast. And on this episode today, we will be talking about perception, positivity, and parents. So we've got lots to discuss. So I wanted to start off with asking you to tell us a little bit about your title and the term you use, conceptual engineers.
Okay, so I suppose really it's kind of derived from a need for people working with young children to be valued a little bit more by society. So unfortunately, it does appear that people don't value the early childhood sector as greatly as they should, in my eyes.
For sure, yeah.
So people say things like, "Oh, I'm just a parent. I work with children," and quite a lot of comments from other people have been things like, "Oh, so you just play," kind of dismissive, derogatory. When I worked in one of the local colleges, and somebody asked me what I was doing, and I said that I was teaching the diploma course in early childhood. And she said, A levels in babysitting, he said.
Oh, wow.
I think
that's offensive.
It is offensive, but I think that's very much the approach of people that aren't in early childhood. They don't understand the importance, the relevance, the pivotal role that we play. So we talked about what we should be called. There's a lot of debate about what people should be called, and we looked at early years specialists and different things. And I just thought, well, what we do actually is we build brains. We actually have the most important job in the world, because we work with children and we build their brains and we create their dispositions with them. We co-construct their knowledge. And so what we're building is we're building concepts. You know, we introduce them to lots of things, the basic concepts, but just the concept of humanity and reciprocal communication. We're building brains in that. And so really, if you're called an architect or if you're called an engineer, you command a certain amount of respect immediately. People just go, "Oh, there's an engineer." Where if you talk about early years, that's not always the same. So what I thought is, let's see what term we can look at that actually represents what we do. Because I know that a lot of people that work in the early childhood sector don't like the title that they actually are given. And the word childcare, although that is what we do, an element of it is caring. Let's be respectful caregivers. It kind of undervalues the rest of it. It's such a complex role. So what I want to do is I wanted to focus on the positivity of, do you know what? We've got the best job in the world. People need to realise that. So I started calling people conceptual engineers. And at first the workforce were like, "Oh, that sounds like really, really important." And I went, "That's my intention. You are really important. Parents are really, really important." Because if you're thinking about the first 1001 days, which is the government's current stance on how important it is, the problem is they say that, but they don't value it. They don't invest in it. They don't respect it. They don't value parents. Hence the movement, the pregnant then screwed. So people,
they're doing some fantastic things.
They're doing some excellent things. And I just think there's a lot of animosity towards parents, a lot of judgment towards parents. And the value really needs to be shifted so that people can go, "Do you know what? They are doing a wonderful job. It's a difficult job. There is no manual. There's lots of things that you can do, but it's quite a varied. So we need to be respectful when we're talking to parents. We need to be respectful when we're talking about how early childhood workers. And so the term conceptual engineer and brain architect kind of reflects what we do really, really well.
Building those foundations and teaching the future scientists and doctors and future engineers and architects
Exactly. It's the dispositions and the attitudes that are formed and laid down in the early years that will actually impact on the way the children learn and the kind of aspirations and where they're going to end up. So it's really important that we get in there early and tell parents, because a lot of parents aren't aware of the brain architecture. It's quite a relatively new area for development. So it's only really in like the last 20 years.
In terms of like neuroscience.
Exactly.
So
if you think about the workforce for the early years, if you've been out there in the last 20 years, you might have done a little bit of neuroscience. But actually, I'm 60 this year, so I've been qualified 40 years. So unless you've actually got an interest in that subject yourself, which I have, you wouldn't find out about that, would you? So there's a lot of people that have been in the sector for a long time that might not be as up to date on the neuroscience.
Yeah, and like the term neuroscience and that field of study is very complex. It's a science, and a lot of people are put off just by that term. They think, oh my goodness, it's way too complicated for me. But we need to be able to break down those barriers and tap into that and get what we can from it and what we need in terms of applying it to early childhood and working with children, young children and parents and families, rather than thinking we must be completely clued up in all of this scientific field and experts in it. Well, we need to take what we can.
It's like the Reggio approach, isn't it? A lot of people talk about that, but you can only do what you can do. So you pick the bits that you can use and the bits that are relevant for you. But by giving parents some of those concepts and some of that information, then they can disseminate them quite easily, because there's some really complex ideas that can be simplified. Things like the brain regulation, it's really easy to get a system that you can teach brain regulation for children, and you can talk to them about it before, so then they've got that information. And it's like everyone, if you've got information about the subject, you can then make your mind up what you do with that information.
Yeah,
right, people are a little bit scared of brain architecture. If I talk about brains, they kind of go, well, that's not me, I'm just an early years worker, I'm just a parent. And when I say, like every interaction that you have with your child is forming connections in that child's brain, they kind of go, oh my God, I didn't realize I was so important. Well, they are important. And that's the message that I want people to receive. It's really, really important that they believe in themselves and know just how valuable they are.
Yeah, and this is all part of advocating for the early childhood sector and professionalizing educators and giving them that confidence as well, but then at the same time allowing parents to have that understanding and confidence that they are experts in their children's lives as well, isn't it? It's not just about the educators.
So I'm not suggesting that parents are experts in child development, because if they've not studied it, then obviously they're not. I'm not suggesting that parents are experts in medicine. So, but we go to a doctor and we tell them the symptoms and we tell them how we're feeling, and then we work together. It's a triangulation, really, isn't it? It's the parent, the doctor, the child, or the educator, the parent, the child. And what worries me sometimes is that triangulation doesn't exist. And so it's kind of like they're not always as respectful and valuing of parents as they can be. And that when you do work in triangulation, then the child gets a better deal, the parents get a better deal, the parents gain confidence, so everybody wins. And sometimes it's an overlooked facet of education. If you think about the Plowman report, that was 1967, I think. The
Plowman report.
Now, and so the Plowman report in 1967 was advocating parental involvement. And that's 67. I mean, that's years and years. And still, when you go into nurseries, when I visit nurseries, I see parents stood outside that aren't encouraged to come in and participate. So it's about working with parents. It's working together and co-constructing brains. It's conceptual engineering. And that's what we do.
That's fantastic. And I was just thinking that really reminds me of Bronfenbrenner and his ecological systems theory, because you've got the child at the center and you've got everyone else that kind of influences the child's lives, and parents are kind of there right at the center, and then you get all the educators and professionals. So it's so vital to see the child at the center and everyone else inputting what's important for that child's learning and development and well-being and care. And it's not just those individual experts contributing, it's building that bigger picture, isn't it, like you were saying?
Yeah. If it's not looked at holistically, then you don't get the full picture, and then you can miss something. So it's like the pieces of a jigsaw. If they're not all there, you can't see really what's happening. So yeah, that's kind of where it comes from.
And I was going to ask you about, actually, you mentioned sometimes, you know, that you still see parents kind of at the gate where they may not feel like they're included, or may they not be encouraged to be involved. How do you feel about the term, and this isn't used very much anymore, but I still hear educators say hard to reach families and hard to reach parents. And I know that's that's been contested, that language. So how do you feel about
that? So the programme that we run at Manor and Castle Development Trust, which is like an approach, is parents are experts, and we put parents at the centre because they are at the centre. What we say is parents need to be seen, they need to be seen, they need to be heard, they need to be valued, and then they'll belong. So it's very difficult to see someone if you're not actually going out and speaking to them, if you're not allowing them into your building. So are the parents hard to reach, or is the system putting barriers in their way? So I used to be part of a Show Start programme, and so we had to meet, we had to get out there and meet parents and get the hard to reach parents. That was what we were supposed to be doing. But actually, if you respect parents, and parents know, because they're authentic, they know if you're being authentic or whether you're just trying to get them in to do a tick box. If you get them parents and you build relationships, we had the most successful Show Start parental involvement element of Show Start in Sheffield at the time. So we had as many parents on our partnership board as we had professionals.
Wow, that's fantastic.
It is, because if you have one or two parents, that's quite intimidating to speak in a room full of people that are
full of educators
in their field.
Yeah.
So you had, you had health visitors, you had doctors, we had youth workers, we had teachers, we had head teachers. So for a parent to be confident to speak in that arena, that could be quite off-putting. Whereas if you've got equal amounts of professionals and parents, kind of changes the dynamic. So I think it's only hard to reach. I mean, we used to go and knock on doors and talk to people, and they knew who we were, and we used to get invited in. We're not hard to reach, but you have got to get off your seat and go and engage. So if there's a barrier up at the door, then that is going to impact on them. And it's not what we do, it's how we do it that is important, really.
And it's also about using the right language, isn't it? So I know you talk a lot about this, and it's to sort of diminish those power dynamics. It's important to be able to allow parents and families to feel like they can be part of what you're doing, part of the setting, part of the school, and they can approach you. And if you use language that is not very what's the word, here I am talking about language and struggling to use language not that accessible, inclusive. I guess, and inclusive, it's probably a better word.
I think inclusiveness is really important. So when I first talked about conceptual engineers, the practitioners themselves were like, "Ooh, I don't know if that's the right word for us, Wendy. Like, it makes us sound really important and really clever." And I went, "You are really clever. You are really important. You are the world to these children, and working with the parent and showing that reciprocal relationship. That's what children really need." So language is really important to me. So I grew up when there was a lot of diversive language in so much as you didn't have the word head teacher, they were called headmasters. So it perpetuated the fact that if you wanted to be a head, you kind of tended to have to be a man. So we've changed that, and we are making changes all the time. So nobody uses the word headmaster anymore. They use the word head teacher. But there's lots of examples. Firefighter. You can look at language and just go, "Oh yeah, gosh, I'd not realised the changes that we'd had in my lifetime." But it kind of goes more than that. So we've got to think about, generally in Britain, we focus on a deficit, on a deficit model. So in the language, there's a lot of emphasis on the 13 million word gap, and people go on and on about there's a big word gap. But we can change that just by talking about word wealth. So if you're talking about word gap, that's a judgment, a statement. You've come to a conclusion. And when you talk about low socioeconomic status environments and communities, that can be bloody annoying for people. It's like, oh God, it's always us. Do you know what I mean? When actually there's a lot
feeling
of
really targeted.
Exactly. But when you talk about people and you're talking about word wealth, that's a positive. That's like it's kind of like a pathway into the future. So we have to be careful about what words we use if we want to include people. And it's like parenting courses. People say, oh God, parenting courses aren't they awful? And generally, they're not that positive. And even being invited to a parenting course, parents feel judged. They feel like they've got something lacking and that it's a deficit. So we don't, ours is not a parenting course. Ours is really more a self-awareness. So we give people lots of information about brains. We talk about lots of different things like mindset. We look at strategies. We look at schemas. We look at perception, because people don't understand the difference in perception and personality portraits. So we look at things that are going to be useful for parents to be people, because before the parents, they are people. But our education system doesn't always focus on knowing about other people. It doesn't always even focus on knowing ourselves. And it's interesting, isn't it, that Ofsted are wanting us to know the children. That's the emphasis at the moment. And you can know children, but actually if you don't know yourself and know your own biases, you don't know kind of where you stand. So we talk a lot about ourselves, and that, again, that's not a very British thing, because you know, we're very, very stiff upper lip and getting on with things. But actually, when you start talking about things like brains and like personalities and why people are like they are, it's fascinating, and parents love it. They call it transformational. So it's quite empowering.
Yeah, and I just want to pick up on the point where you said how it's interesting that when parents go to like parenting courses, it's seen as negative and suggesting that something is wrong, and that's why you're taking that step. And it's about getting it right and finding out, isn't it, rather than, oh, something's wrong and that's why I'm doing it. And it reminded me actually of that narrative around mental health as well, or the term that I've started kind of using as well as mental health is mental fitness. And it's, you know, when someone starts talking about their mental health or maybe even going to therapy, people think, oh God, something's wrong, you know, you're not well, or there's something that's you're different, there's something that's not right with you. But actually it's about taking care of your mental health or mental fitness. It's about constantly working on it and getting it, you know, improving it, getting it right, going on that journey, rather than if I'm doing this, if I'm going to have support around my mental health, if I'm reading a mental health book, or if I am getting support with my parenting, that means that something is not right. And actually it's that deficit perspective, isn't it, again, from society, I guess.
Exactly.
It should be the other way around. It should be like, oh, that's fantastic that you're really trying to learn more about your parenting and find out from these experts or educators.
Yeah, it's kind of the early intervention, isn't it? It's like really what we ought to be doing is teaching the principles that we discuss in Parents for Experts before children leave school. So quite a lot of the parents have said to me, why didn't we learn this at school? Why didn't anybody talk to us about this at school? Because we're so much better equipped to deal with things. I think what it is, we do something around personality and personality portraits. And when parents understand themselves and what triggers, what motivates them, and why they act as they do, it actually helps them understand themselves better. So, and again, that's not a parenting thing. You don't have to be a parent to access that. But once you understand yourself, just the things that stress you out and why you get stressed. So we don't realize that the brain is not for intelligence. We think the brain is for intelligence. That's what we're told when we go to school. It's about intelligence, it's getting your exams, it's going through all this process. The brain's not for intelligence at all. The brain is for survival. That's what the brain is for.
Yeah.
And so what we're saying is we decide what ways we think are going to help us survive the most. So some people are really conscious about safety. So everything, when you're talking to things, they've got a little bit of a committee in their head, and they're going, oh, what about, what if, oh, they need a plan B. Other people are really about getting things right. And so it has to be done right and properly. And so their focus is more on where things are, where they can improve things and accurate and right. For me personally, my focus is on fun. So I think if people aren't having a certain amount of fun, and it's not an enjoyable thing, then they're not going to learn. So that's really important to me. So depending on where your motivation is, you might be really conflicted. So somebody who really, really wants to be conscious about the safety, and somebody who really, really wants to be confident about the fun elements might clash a bit. When you know what actually motivates you, you kind of understand a lot of other people, because asking you to change, you couldn't change how you are without a lot of work, and other people can't. So it kind of breeds tolerance. And what the parents are saying is, oh my God, like this is really interesting. It's really accessible, and it makes a big impact. Just like the schema stuff, when we talk about the schemas that we do within the Parents Are Experts, we talk about schemas and patterns in play. And parents are like, well, I just thought it would be difficult.
Because they don't have that awareness and understanding of what are they doing. You know, I don't understand why they're displaying this kind of behavior, and there isn't any kind of awareness that they might be doing it for a specific purpose, or it's natural to be doing something like that for learning and curiosity and exploration and all of these other incredible things.
Exactly. When you actually get parents to observe the children and take videos of the children when they're involved in deep level learning, then you kind of open up the world. So the perception of the parent transforms. So I had a little boy that his mum thought he was deliberately cycling his bike into other children. And she was like, oh, what am I going to do? Look at him, he's doing it again. And I said, like, let's just watch him. He deliberately ramming his bike into children's legs. What he's doing is he's so focused on the rotation of the wheel that he doesn't know where he's going. Now I'm
looking down.
Exactly. So I'm not suggesting we don't do anything, because obviously we want to protect other children. But if you understand the motivation behind his behaviour, then you look at it differently, and then you can talk about, oh, well, if we're going to be on the bike watching the wheels, we need to be in an open space. We can't do it where we are. So this is not about going, oh, let children do what they want, which often parents initially, they go, oh, you're saying they can do what they want. And I say, no, what we're doing is we're still assessing it. We're still skillful workers as parents, as, you know, conceptual engineers. Conceptual engineers, we're very skillful in what we do. That interaction and that interface, just as parents and practitioners, as conceptual engineers are doing. But it's looking at it from the child's point of view and seeing it from the child's perspective.
And then I guess that is allowing you as a parent or an educator to then facilitate that child's learning in perhaps a safer way, or in a way that will support their learning even more.
Exactly, it's more informed. So we wrote, the parents were like, they love the schemas, and so they were saying, like, well, we need books that we can share. So we actually put some books together. I've got a copy of one of them here. There's actually 4 already. And there's another couple coming out, but theirs are based on real children. So one of the pages, Anna F. Grave, who people will be aware of from In the Moment Planning, she wrote a review for the books. And she particularly likes the page that's got the brain on, because we're bringing the brain to the attention of the children and to the practitioners. And it just says, we let her lead her learning, knowing her experiences, we're building her brain. Curiosity and exploration ensure there's no real need to explain. So if you learn something, if you have the intrinsic motivation to learn something for yourself, that is retained and registers in your brain at a much deeper level than if you're a passive recipient of information. But actually, you're not really that interested in at the moment. So that self-exploration in schemas is phenomenal in making an increased self-efficacy. So they know that they've found that out for themselves. And you can almost sometimes see that light bulb moment. You can see that happening when children are allowed to explore for themselves. I'm not saying they need to do that all the time, every day, every minute, because we need the balance between child-centred and adult-led activities. But there's a big place for schemas and understanding, especially if you understand the signals of deep-level learning, when there is actually some learning taking place.
And I guess in terms of those kind of adult-led activities, if you understand the child's interests and you've observed their deep level learning, understand their schemas, then you can plan for those adult-led activities to be around the child's interests. So everything really is still around the child's interest, because that is the best way to go. You can still kind of give them new knowledge through their interests by observing their schemas.
definitely. Because what you've got to do is, if it doesn't resonate, it's not going to be retained. And so making something resonate, Colby Trevarden says, emotion is the motor of cognition. And I love that quote. And I think it's really evident when you talk to people that are passionate about something, because they are actually, because they're involved and it's authentic and it's resonating, it's going to be retained. Something, if you know something and really know it, and you've learnt it yourself, you remember that forever, because it's a deep entrenched connection in your brain architecture.
For sure, it makes perfect sense, because we as adults are not going to do something if we're not interested, and we lose that focus and that interaction, in the moment, if it's a social kind of interaction, if we're not interested in the conversation, for instance, or the activity. Emotion is the motor of cognition. I love that.
It's great, isn't it? It's one of my favourites. I have that. That's a quote that we share with parents, and we unpick it a little bit. And then my other one is that I really love is perception is real, even if it's not reality. And that's Edward de Bono. And he really talks about how you feel affects your thoughts in such a way that even if something's not true, if that's your perception of it, then that actually is your reality. And until you have that conversation and that interaction, that reciprocal exchange, then you're going to carry on believing that. So communication is so undervalued, and reciprocal communication is undervalued. And what a lot of people do is they don't listen to understand, they listen for their turn. So we talk a lot about waiting and listening, so that you can understand what someone is saying, rather than waiting and listening to have your turn. Because sometimes you can see people, can't you, getting ready to say,
for sure,
to do this. So actually unpicking that and listening to parents, really actively listening to parents and children, puts a totally different perspective on it. And we are skilled conceptual engineers. We do that daily. So in early years, that is something that is much more apparent than in a lot of other sectors. There's a lot of listening, but the external world doesn't always value that complex role that we play.
And I guess it's about us. This is what I always say, and this is the whole point of the Voice of Early Childhood platform as well, is that we as educators, or anyone that works within the early childhood field or has anything to do with children in early childhood, should be advocates, and advocating for what we do, and advocating for the early childhood kind of stage of life, because it's about making sure that everybody knows how important that stage is, how important our roles are, how important those roles as parents and educators are.
Oh God, definitely. It's the early intervention, isn't it? If you've got the information and you can get it right the first time, you don't have to go back and rebuild things. But people can only act on what they know. So how do we get that information out there, to practitioners, to parents? How do we do that on a kind of larger scale than we're currently doing? So in Sheffield, it's really successful what we do, but it needs to get out there, and it needs to be a greater reach. We need to have a greater reach, really.
And I think, and this again, it goes back to why I have started this platform, is because what the conversations I've had with a lot of people quite recently, especially, is that a lot of the sector works in silos. We've got this organization here, that organization here, and so doesn't work with so because there's some kind of competition or something like that. And it's just about bringing everybody together into one place and having the same dialogue in one place, or at least, communicating, so that we are, stronger together, as the phrase is, because that's just how it is, isn't it? If the government, who we're trying to get through to, hear individual voices constantly, well, it's not as strong as all of those voices put together.
Exactly. And that's the thing. It's not even just the silos. It's the different names. Certainly, like the childminding sector often feel really marginalised, because they're not even always included in the general discussion.
That's
and
a good point.
They play a really valuable contribution in that early childhood sector. But quite a lot of training that people put on is often during the day. childminders can't take a day off, so you have to plan and do things at other times so they can be included. And so it's really important that all aspects of early childhood are included,
and all voices are included and considered.
Definitely, which is why your podcast is so important, because it can reach so many. You can do, you can get to people in different countries, you can get people in different sectors. And I mean, I've worked across the education, the health, the PVI, the private, and things have done very, very differently. And so it's making sure that you are accessible, which hopefully you are going to be, Angelica, because you can get there when you want. I mean, my family in Australia, and I can say, oh, you need to, there's a so-and-so on this, and people can access that when it suits them rather than,
Yeah, exactly. And and you mentioned international voices and international practice, and we've just recently been to Panama for the World Forum in Early Childhood, and that was fantastic for sharing and hearing about international practices and everything that's going on globally. And I will certainly be having a lot of our guests that we met there, from different countries, having them on the podcast and write articles, because it was just like we already know how vital it is to share practice, across the globe and get those insights. But I think it really highlighted going to Panama, how everything really is so intertwined internationally. We're still the same people, we're still humans, we're still working to the same common goal. We still want to support parents and families and children. And actually, one of my biggest realizations and takeaways from the conference was that we are experiencing the same issues, here in the UK or in Britain, in England, the same as in USA and Kenya and Panama, and Malaysia. There's so many things that we are experiencing that are like, oh wow, this is the same for us, and we were I don't know, I was expecting to hear something different challenges. Of course they do exist, but generally we're experiencing the same kind of workforce issues, lack of professionalism, lack of understanding towards the early childhood sector. I don't know about you, but that's certainly something that I found.
Oh, definitely. I think the work of the people in some of the different countries as well, Kenya in particular, and Vietnam, I went to a wonderful presentation about working with parents, and it's about what we can do as well, how we can support people, our colleagues in different countries, and how they can support us, because there's a lot of similarities, but there's a lot of differences as well, and it's kind of embracing those differences, looking at how differently people do that. I found it really affirming, because a lot of what I've been saying was being said by so many other people, and sometimes I think you feel like, is it just me? I feel like it's just me waving my flag against the world. And in that organisation, it felt very much that there was a lot of us with the same passion and enthusiasm, saying, we need to do something here. And so working together is really, really important. One of the things we're going to do is hopefully share the books and get them translated into different languages.
Fantastic.
And do some remodeling of the illustrations so that children can see themselves within books, replicated in the pages, because that builds a certain sense of identity and self-efficacy. And you can actually see children. The first book that I did was Matthew Lines Things Up. It's a trajectory schema book. And when Matthew found out about the book, obviously it's a long time. He was very small when we did it initially, and now he's quite older. And he came and signed some of the books. And when he came in, he kind of came in as though saying, oh, goodness me, what am I doing here? And then he went out and he'd grown a foot, and he was kind of like, who would you like it dedicating to? just seeing himself and realizing the value. And we've had that with other children. So what they do is they'll say things like, oh, I like to wrap things up. And because they identify with those books and they feel validated, they feel affirmed, and that impacts on their confidence, the self-efficacy, and actually in the learning, because we're talking about what they're learning, what concepts they're exploring. So that's, if we can do that in other countries, Vietnam and Kenya is what I'm hoping to start off with. It's just that little bit. We just got to do what we can, can't we? We've got to do what we can with what we've got, with the people that we can work with. So yeah, it's really exciting. And I think that's why I wanted the title to be about positivity, because there is so much excellence out there.
Sure.
That we need to be focusing on the role that we do and how rewarding it is. Like actually working with children. It's my dad once said to me, find a job you love and you'll never have to work a day in your life. And I love working with children. I love working with parents. I love everything that we do. And you get so much back. So it's not just enough to go, oh, well, you enjoy your job, so we'll not pay you very well. What we need to do is we need to say, we enjoy your job, you're doing a great job, and actually you deserve some recognition. So conceptual engineer, brain architect, call people what you want, but pay people for the skills that they've got. Because fundamentally, if we don't build brains effectively and properly in the beginning, then we have to spend lots of money, lots of time rebuilding that. And that's why I quite like the term that you used earlier about fitness. When you were
mental fitness.
Mental fitness. I love that. That's a really positive. I shall take that from today's session and use it, because that's what we need to do. We need to start, and we can only change society by being that change, and we need to be the change. So if you want to change something, then you need to find a way to do it. And language is one of the simplest ways but most effective ways to change perception.
That reminds me of the common quote of "Be the change you want to see in the world."
Exactly.
And I know you like quotes and poems and things like that.
I definitely do. Yeah, I've written you a poem about language, because we were talking about language. And I don't think people understand the value of the word, the power of the word. But I bet you can remember the insults that you've been given along your life. You can recall them really, really easily.
Yeah, people remember the negative things that they were told. Unfortunately, that's what really sticks, doesn't it? That's what becomes a trauma, unfortunately.
Exactly. And that's because we focus on the negative. We're not particularly positive focused. So by focusing on that positivity and switching things around so that you're looking perception wise, it's not what you can't do. I use the work of Carol Dweck in mindset within the program. And when parents look at the fixed and growth mindset, they are fascinated by just using, changing a word. And recently I was doing the brain architecture course that I deliver in Sheffield. And one of the teachers said, all I've done, Wendy, is change the word by adding the word yet. And it's changed the classroom. And he said it had a really big impact because they talked about it. And just using the word yet, again, it gives you a pathway to the future, doesn't it? So what you're saying, so the power of yet. Carol Dweck talks about the power of yet. And she talks about, normally if we went out and had a driving test and we failed the driving test, well, then you failed. If you failed, where are you? You're nothing, where you failed. It's really, disheartening. But if they said not yet instead of you failed, that's not the end of it, is it?
So like you haven't passed yet.
Yeah, and that's it. So you say, what's happened? Oh, you've not yet passed. And that's like, not yet. Oh, I can try again. I can do it again. So just reframing language into being inclusive for the power of yet. She's written a whole book on mindset, Carol Dweck. She's absolutely brilliant. But you can simplify it really easy, because not everybody's got enough time to read the whole book, and it can be quite laborious.
Yeah.
So if you present concepts that are really simplified and easily accessible, then parents can take them on board and practitioners can take them on board. And it doesn't just transform the child's life, it transforms their opinion of themselves. Because we are very critical. We live in a very critical society. There's judgment everywhere you go, no matter how famous, how not famous you are. It's kind of like everybody and anybody suffers from judgment at all times, because even a glance or a look, or as we've just said, a word. I can remember my nicknames when I was at school, because they were really hurtful and it resonated. Emotion is the power of emotion is the power of cognition. So if we're looking at it's really important what we say and the words that we use, because we will retain and be selective about the things that we remember.
Yeah, for sure.
It's language is important, and using the correct terminology that defines early years childhood practitioners. as, you know, conceptual engineers, as brain architects, as, do you know what? We are so important, and somebody somewhere's got to start and kind of wave that flag. So hopefully today, now you've had me on here, there'll be a lot more people saying, you know what, conceptual engineers, that makes so much more sense.
Yeah. And I think, Wendy, you have and you will continue to inspire and empower, probably is a better word, empower so many educators and parents. And it's just so fantastic talking to you about the work that you do. And like right now, I feel so excited about the, you know, even more excited about the early childhood sector and my work as well, because you're really advocating for that. So I just want to say thank you for, well, not just being on this podcast, but just thank you for being you and advocating for the sector, and, you know, for parents and for childhood, and just having these conversations and changing the narrative. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, if we can change the narrative and we can get people to think, even if you don't agree, not everybody's going to agree with what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely fine. We don't have to have a consensus. What we have to have is debate.
For
And that's the
sure.
most important thing.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I love that. Okay, well, I think it's probably a good time to wrap up the podcast episode. So thank you so much for being on here and talking to me about some really exciting things. I feel like some of the things that we addressed really need like a follow-up episode, you know, even, you know, the things around language and listening and holding space for someone rather than waiting for your turn to speak, and all these, you know, things.
Yeah. I've written a chapter in a book that has just been released, and so some of those things are discussed in that book, but I'm more than happy to come back and talk to you about anything early years related, because it is my passion.
Fantastic. And so for those of you who are listening, you can find Wendy's article around what we discussed today, perception, positivity, and parents, on the Voice of Early Childhood website, which does have links to kind of the books that you've written and what we mentioned today in terms of the Little Schema series as well. So you can find all of that there. But yeah, thank you very much, Wendy.
And thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. We just need to be out there, you know, waving our flags, conceptual engineers, and speak. Hopefully we'll all be able to speak soon with a little bit more status.
For sure. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy.